Hi, everyone, and welcome to Break the Glass Ceiling, Bridge the Wage Gap. My name is Krista Nepper. I am your host today, and we are going to talk about how to interview and negotiate salary as a woman. Now, it does strike me, and you'll notice that I paused there, that we actually have to have this course 50 years after our foremothers began the feminist movement and really drove us into the workforce in mass numbers, in which we advocated for ourselves and we fought against sexual harassment and pregnancy discrimination and wage discrimination. This is not over, and it still continues. And we know that it is a huge problem by the statistics and by the title that I have named this course itself, Break the Glass Ceiling. Some of the statistics that I like to note around here, one of the ones that still kind of sticks in my gut when I say it, is the fact that there are more CEOs named John than there are female CEOs. Actually, only 22% of executives are women, even though women are about to become the majority of people in the workforce. By 2018, they're going to be 51%. But for whatever reason, we work our way up to middle management and then we become stuck. And we're going to talk about those reasons, and we're going to talk about those solutions as well. Other statistics that resonate with me, even though women started entering and graduating from law school at parity around 2001, and so we're talking about 15 years after that fact, there's still only 18% of the equity partners in law firms. So we have a long way to go before we actually break that glass ceiling and then bridge the wage gap. There are several statistics to share there. The one that's probably most notable is 79 cents. So when we talk about women making 79 cents on the dollar, that, my friends, is for white women. That is what I like to call the platinum membership. But when race and gender intersects, it becomes more dire. It becomes more critical that we discuss this and we discuss what's going on behind the scenes. Because for Black women, that statistic is 66 cents on the dollar. And for Latina women, that statistic is 54 cents on the dollar. That's another one. I could just feel it in my body when I cite that statistic, where Latina women are making about half of what men make. We know that that is not deserved. So let's talk about what we're going to actually do about that. And I am going to provide the roadmap for you that you can see here. So this course is divided into 5 different sections. So let's go through this really briefly. I'm going to tell you who I am and we're going to get started then. So part 1, we're going to discuss masculine and feminine energy. This might have been something that you have heard about in the past, maybe by way of romantic relationships. If you've read Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, I started studying this after I was divorced, and it did come in the context of romantic relationships. But as I began to pour myself into this work, I realized that I didn't become less feminine when I left the bedroom for the boardroom, as I like to say. And that is something that we're going to dive into, because typically women are in their feminine energy and they're encouraged to be in their masculine energy when they go into the workforce. Now, this will vary and we'll talk about why, but feminine energy is something that really contributes to the betterment of the workforce, to how much money companies make, and it's something that is vastly undervalued. So we'll dive into that momentarily. We'll also talk about male and female distinctions. Now, I know we learned about anatomy and we had sex ed when we were 10 or 11 years old, but we're going to dive deeper into this. And this is information that our foremothers who began the feminist movement believed would hold us back. That any differences that we acknowledged as far as neurological, if we talked about the evolutionary science, that would be used against us. And while I don't disagree with their position at the time, I think that we've seen not talking about this material has only gotten us so far. Still have that 79, 66, 54 number, still less than 5% of CEOs are women. We've never broken the ultimate glass ceiling in this country of being president of the United States. So I think that having a discussion about this is very timely and very critical to our future success. In part 3, we're going to talk about socialization and subconscious bias, or something we call implicit bias. And that is what I like to say reminds us all that we are a little bit sexist. So a lot of times when we think of misogyny, or we think of, the repression of women's rights or holding us back, that we think of it as something that men do to women. And actually, that is not true at all. We are all raised with the same set of gendered social norms. And because of that, when someone acts outside of what we perceive them to be or how they are supposed to act, we will become triggered. We might even get angry and we might rebel against their actions without even knowing why that we are upset. So we're going to unpack that pretty advantageously, I think. And hopefully once we have that knowledge, we're going to be able to apply that when we go in to advocate for ourselves, to promote ourselves, and we can alert other people to the situation in a very subtle and a very acceptable way. So in part 4, we're really going to dive into the interview process. We're going to talk about confidence. We're going to talk about how these implicit biases get in our way. And I have a very structured way in which we're going to want to answer complex interview questions. Now, I have been conducting interviews for over 10 years. I was with a Fortune 500 company in which I recruited, in which I interviewed, in which I hired, promoted, did succession planning and all of that. So I have a lot of experience on both sides of the table. I do in order to do this work and to coach other women, constantly go on interviews, and I'm constantly checking to see what works and what works best. So we'll talk about those difficult questions. And then one of the things that I think is most critical, and I'll show you how to customize this for an interview, but what do you ask when you are on an interview? Because what is most critical is how you show up and you have a conversation. Again, a lot of times when we are interviewing, we think of it as a powerless position where the other person is evaluating us, deciding if they want to bring us on, and our fate is in their hands. And I want to let you know that nothing could be farther from the truth. You are, and you need to step up and be a critical player in the decision as to whether this company is a fit for you. And I'm going to show you how to do that in part 4. In part 5, we get into money. Now, one of the reasons that negotiating salary and advocating for ourselves is difficult is because the money is one of those taboo subjects that we were taught to steer away from when we were kids. How many of you have heard there are 3 things you don't talk about in polite company or at a dinner party? It's money, it's religion, it's politics. So this makes the top 3 of, taboo subjects. So no wonder we really have this energy around it. I don't even have a word. It's just this stopgap that we have in our conversations. The other thing about that too is we have so many policies that companies attempt to promote, which are actually illegal, that say that you can't talk about salary, that salary is confidential. And so we're going to talk about the laws that are in effect that actually makes that something that we can share, and how we would navigate that sticky conversation later on as well. So we're going to have some full strategies in effect, how you get them to throw out a number first, what language you should use, and how to approach that, including some talk about body language as well. Now, who am I to be teaching this course to you and to be standing here in front of you? Well, just a little bit about my background. And this was one of the things I was always curious about my professors and how they came to be experts in their line of work and what drove them to do this. And I know for myself that the personal is always much more interesting than the professional. So I'll hit on both so that you have a sense of who I am and why I do this for a living. So as mentioned, my name is Krista Nepper. I'm an attorney, a career coach to women, and a professional development consulting, which means I go into companies and I help create diverse teams, showing corporations and organizations how to retain, attract, and promote women. I didn't always do this. In fact, my early education and what I dreamed of being as a little girl was an actress. I started out as a theater major at Northwestern University. And when I was there, that was about the time that the Anita Hill hearings and her testimony became public and became very, very prevalent in a discussion that was predominant in our country. Now, if you're a lot younger than me, which I bet most of you are, you might not have heard of Anita Hill or know who she is. And let me assure you, she is worth a Google search. But she accused and testified against now Supreme Court Judge Clarence Thomas. And it was a very controversial he said, she said discussion and testimony. And it really motivated me to look deeper into the feminist movement and to become involved in politics at that time. So after that, I started volunteering on multiple campaigns. I volunteered for Senator Carol Moseley Braun. She was the first Black woman to be voted into the United States Senate, getting my words a little bit. And I also worked on the Clinton Gore campaign back at that time, and then was accepted to the internship program for now the late Senator Edward M. Kennedy from Massachusetts. And I absolutely loved DC. I will show you what a nerd I really am, but I was just starstruck and awestruck by all of the senators and journalists and people that I saw and experienced in DC. I was constantly learning. I was constantly being challenged, and it was a really rewarding experience. I was running the internship program after I graduated from college. So interned, finished my degree, went back. That was my first job after college graduation. Loved it, learning something new every day. And I was very interested in becoming more involved in policy and getting to advise the senator and getting to do the jobs that I saw as critical. So the sexy jobs were all held by attorneys. I told you I was a nerd. So what I did was I went back to law school. And I went to American University, which you may have heard of, but I'm pretty sure you don't know the history of the school. It was founded by two women before women even had the right to vote. So if you think about what you deal with on a daily basis as far as challenges in the workplace, and even when you go out in public, you can think of what these two women endured and how great their journey was. So it was one of the first schools at the time to have a clinical program for women in the law, and I believe the first school to have a clinical program for domestic violence. So that was one of the reasons I chose to go there. And I took amazing classes on feminist jurisprudence and sexual discrimination and work-life balance and social policy. I joined the Journal of Gender and Social Policy. I worked at Now Legal Defense, the National Organization for Women, and I just really loved my experience. It was a very safe place to be. I was growing. You'll notice that that's a big theme with me, constantly learning, and did pretty well. And when I graduated, I went to a large international law firm, and I realized from the second I got there that I had absolutely been hired as a token. I, for a period of time, was the only woman in our litigation department. It was a very gut-wrenching experience. I really wasn't given what I needed to succeed at the time. And some people were even so threatened by my presence that they would hide book sections of the code that I needed in their office just to ensure that I really did fail at that position. One of the things that was interesting about that, and I can reflect on it now, having studied what I've studied and doing the work that I do, is I thought that there was something that I had done wrong, that I must not have been a team player or made myself clear or gone to bat for my colleagues. And it took a long time, and it actually took other men, my husband at the time, and even a taxi cab driver, if you will, who stopped me in my tracks and said, no, this doesn't happen to men. This is happening to you. They're threatened by the fact that you're female, in order to even recognize that this was gender bias that was going on in that situation. So I left there and went back to Capitol Hill, worked for Senator Debbie Stabenow for a period of time, and then went to a Fortune 500 company where I, as mentioned, was hiring, recruiting, managing teams, and I really loved it. I was teaching and facilitating trainings. And it was funny, about that time, I was newly married and had been at the position for about a year and applied for a promotion. And one of my colleagues asked me, well, why would you do that? Because you're going to be pregnant within the year. As though my decision to have children was contingent on the fact that I had recently gotten married, and that was mutually exclusive to me being a competent and present member of the workforce. So I'll cut to the chase. I went to the interview, I made it to the final round, and a man got the job. And about a year later, something similar happened. Promotion, I apply, make it to the final round, and a woman who was unmarried got the job. And one of the subjects that we'll talk about in short order is maternal bias. It's one of the types of implicit bias. And I'll give you a heads up that you need not have a baby in order to be discriminated against or experience maternal bias. It's one of those ingrained beliefs, and it's actually the toughest one to overcome. So I want to make sure that whether or not you're a parent, if you are of childbearing age and you're in a serious relationship, or you've just recently become engaged or recently got married, this can show up for you, even if you don't plan to have children. And if you do, it's something that we need to be aware of, and we need to be able to articulate the solutions to this as well. But needless to say, in summary, our world is gender biased. So I want to just go into what do we mean by this? One of the things that I've heard so often, I was actually talking to a vice president of sales very recently, and I was telling him about my work, and his response to me was, oh, well, I just always hire the best person for the job. And the thing is that you want to. I know you do. I know you're very sincere when you say that, but there's so much going on just underneath the surface that we are unaware of. And so some of these statistics will really shed some light on what it is that we're dealing with. So first and foremost, a woman's chances of making it past a first round of orchestra auditions increases by 50% when we cannot see her. So if we just, pull a curtain over the cello player, it's much more likely that she's going to advance. And if we're listening to music, which is usually how that appears, right? We're not always looking at the artist. It's amazing that this is still a factor in how we promote and how we select. Next bullet point, an identical resume with a male name versus a female name has a 30% increase in the chance of it being deemed worthy of hire. So if I have one resume that has my name, Kristen, on it, and I have another resume that is exactly the same, but the name is Christopher, he or this resume is 30% more likely to make it to the next round. So even getting a job, let alone getting the salary that we deserve, it's an uphill battle. And then this statistic, I put it in there because just to reiterate the point I made earlier, no one is immune to being sexist. Women, we do this to one another. And this statistic, it's one of those gut-wrenching ones. Mothers overestimate the crawling ability of their sons as compared to their daughters. And parents, they reprimand their daughters twice as often as their sons. And so we're going to get into the ramifications of that, both good and bad, when we get into part 3 and our section on socialization. But what I want to emphasize overall is that male performance is overestimated in the workforce, but especially in male-dominated fields. So if you are in tech, financial, law, banking, medicine in particular, architects, those are all male-dominated fields in which male performance is going to be overestimated even more than in other professions. And something that's very interesting, professions that were once male-dominated that have slowly over time become female-dominated, those salaries have frozen or decreased overall. So just this perception in the world that when women do that work, it's not as valued as when men do that work. So this is a really important component of learning how to interview and negotiate salary, because we need to start at the beginning so we can recognize the reality of what is going on, rather than just assuming that it was me and there was something more I should have done, and what did I do wrong, and why didn't I say that, and if only I'd leaned in, and if only I'd advocated. The truth is that this is the world that we were born into, but it doesn't mean that it's what we have to accept. So on that note, we're going to begin at the beginning. If you have not yet downloaded the workbook, please go ahead and do that now. And you're going to want to flip to exercise 1. And you can see the question, how do you want to feel at work? So let me back up for just a second. I know that feelings are not a big component of what we talk about in the workplace, but this is really important because we're going to start off talking about what you value, what you're good at, and then how you're going to articulate that when you get into an interview situation. And also, when you're promoted, when you're going on to those annual reviews, how do you say that properly? And this begins by recognizing what it is that you want and how you want to feel. Because here's the thing, there is not anything on this planet that we want without having some inclination that the having of it is going to make us happier. So if it's a new job or it's a promotion, maybe it's going to add additional money to our bank account, and that's going to make us feel more secure, and that's going to make us feel more grounded. And there's nothing wrong with any of our reasons, but we just want to keep the mirror up front, and we want to make sure that we're acknowledging and aware of what our own motivations are. So I know this question, it was motivated by the work of Danielle Laporte, and it might seem a little woo-woo or an odd place to start, but indulge me, and I'm going to show you how this parallels into the work that we're about to do. So in order to complete it, I'd like you to put your phone in airplane mode or do not disturb and get out the timer and set it for 3 to 5 minutes, however long you think it's going to take you to write. And what I want you to do is to do train of thought writing. Now, if you've never done this before, what this means is you are just going to write without rereading and evaluating and judging. I know it's hard for us, what you've just written. So even if you start off saying, I don't know why she's making us do this exercise. Who is this woman? Why do I have to do this? I feel really weird. Just start off writing and don't go back and check it. Don't punctuate it properly. Don't worry about spelling or capitalization or all those rules that we're taught, because this is for you and you alone. So just train a thought, go for 5 minutes. When you've completed that, I want you to come back and we will begin part 1, masculine and feminine energy.